Hey, fellow G&Ters, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. And Daniel was making me laugh before this podcast started, and I can't stop. Anyways, so we're going through, and we are talking today specifically about the great sociologist Max Weber and his idea of charismatic authority, and how that connects into one of the things that we've been trying to look at over our kind of last little series of episodes on cult psychology. So we're going to be talking about charismatic authority and cult psychology. And this is part of what I don't know what you think, Daniel, but for me, it's been one of the more fascinating, I think kind of important, but also sort of out of the box projects for us. Because we kind of looked around at the world more in the immediate rather than just talking about some of the other psychospiritual stuff we'd like to talk about.
Yeah.
And we decided to really go through, we're not people who do politics and news of the week. But there's so much deep stuff happening in the culture, and our way to respond to it was really to talk about kind of cult psychology.
Yeah.
All right, so for context of this, for people who haven't caught up with the other episodes, we've done kind of a host of different little things in the project we've been doing. We looked at social psychology of conformity and cult psychology. We looked at the great ideas of the great sociologist Emil Durkheim and how it has to do with cult psychology and how you build, like, how you get people to like bond themselves in the groups. And now we're into this last part, this kind of Max Weber part, another great sociologist, and his idea of like what kind of authorities do people respond to? So we'll get into the charismatic one today. We're going to do a series of episodes. We already talked about people who are maybe a little bit more legalistic authority. We talked about traditional authority. And now we're into the one that probably has the most connection to cult, but the idea of charismatic authority. But I mean, oh yeah, before we jump in, then I'll do the usual thing that I like we have to do in at the beginning of every podcast. If you want to help support our efforts to keep doing this kind of educational stuff that we're up to, one of the things you can do is give us a like and a subscribe and recommend to friends and do all the things that people ask you in every podcast you ever watched ever, because it does help us out. So thanks for that if you can do it. And now we're in. Before we talk about the full-on charismatic thing, I wanted to, we learned a lot doing this, and one of the things that really hit me was, on the one hand, you really could be talking, we were talking off mic, you were talking about diagnosing society, right?
Yeah.
And treating society. Like, can you do that? Can you say, okay, here's our societal diagnosis, the same way we'd make a medical diagnosis?
Mm-hmm.
And I think on some level that's part of what we're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other part, though, and I think this is the part that strikes me as psycho-spiritually interesting, and I'm still coming to terms of how I fully want to phrase it. But this idea that, if you're a legalistic person, like we talked about in a previous episode, and your main thing is you like to see laws and rules and order, or if you're a traditional authority person and you want to believe in whatever tradition, that maybe has gone back through your family lineage and things like that, like it's a kind of a personality type too. So I don't know if Weber was fully talking about that as personality types, but I'm sort of seeing it that way. And that's been like, I think what's been really interesting for me to kind of realize that there's just certain personality types or or these concepts define certain personality types.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you get to understand them, it even gives you sort of this might be the sort of scientific part of G&T in a way,
Mm.
where you start going, okay, if I got a theory, and let's say this theory is one of people who respond to traditional authority, and we kind of gave a full kind of description of that in the one of our previous episodes on this, so you can check that out. We won't do all of that again, but people who respond to a traditional authority, one of the it just hit me. I'll bounce it off. You can tell me what you think, but it
Yeah.
hit me that when you really look at that, and a lot of traditional authority structures, they're kind of okay with like sexual abuse. They just kind of are.
Give an example.
Well, like I was just thinking about like the Catholic Church. It's a
Mm.
traditional authority structure, and I was raised Catholic. And I mean, there were kind of priests even we were around with our family. We were like, you got to stay away from Father Tony. Like you sort of knew. And those priests, we all know the scandal now. They were all moved around. And then eventually, what happened? Really nothing. And it wasn't like there was a violent reaction to people who were members of that church. I don't belong to it anymore. My uncle was a deacon. I respect my uncle. I don't have anything against anyone's religion, you know, but it's odd. And I was thinking that's really true. And we happen to be recording this in the midst where the Epstein scandal has been unfolding over these last few weeks.
Yeah.
And I was going, well, if that's true, if this is like, if this model, quote unquote, is true, and this is what traditional authority is like, well, then probably people who are traditional authority people will just come to terms with the fact that there's been this potential history of abuse, and they'll just kind of like, okay, cool, and then they'll probably just die out and disappear. Even as much as you could say that cognitive dissonance, one of the other big psych ideas, might make you do that, and probably cognitive dissonance has something to do with this. But I was like, that's just odd, you know? And you can come up with lots of examples like this where there's like sexual abuse scandals in traditional authority structures, and people are like, okay, and they just kind of disappear. And I thought, okay, well, if this model's true, then that'll be my prediction. The people who are traditional authority people, they'll probably let this go
And
because
maybe
it's kind of a diagnostic thing.
maybe even a
I'll,
bit more inclusive. I mean, yes, sexual scandals as a
Mhm.
specific example, but maybe even more inclusive. They're okay with people being taken advantage of.
Yeah, scandals within their community and people being
They're
taken
like
advantage
that's
of.
okay.
Yeah,
You know, we'll let that go. That part of being in charge is that's not what you get to do, but like you can kind of like we'll let that shit slide. You know?
well, in order to like save the tradition, we'll turn a blind eye. Because
Yes,
actually, if we really look at this, the whole thing will get shaky,
correct.
and that's too frightening. So we better. Mhm.
And then this will go. Then you could then move that into like cult.
Yeah,
We'll allow. Oh well, I mean, of course, the leader's got to have 10 children. I mean, he's
yeah,
got the best seed, obviously.
yeah,
So we're gonna let that. Oh, and these are his clergy, and it's always a dude, by the way.
yeah.
Um, so
Well, in my cult book, there are a couple of ladies, but it's pretty rare. But I
okay,
we'll save it for another time. But
there's
it's
always
it's
some
it's
outliers.
mostly a dude.
98% of the time, I think
It's
we
a
can go ahead and
dude.
we'll
Yeah.
round it up. You know what
No,
I
it was
mean?
wild because they have one of them where it was actually a woman and she had like her own kind of sex cult. It does show up, but it's pretty goddamn rare. It's true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So they're just they have tolerance for abuse of power.
Yeah. It hadn't occurred to me. I think we were talking about traditional authority when we were recording it. We had to take a week off. I had some family business I had to take care of. But when we were recording it, it just came up in the episode kind of spontaneously. And I
Yeah.
went, yeah, if we can't really challenge the bishop or whoever, even if they're involved in some shenanigans that we think is bad, because
Mm-hmm.
it'll rattle the whole authority structure. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, that probably means, that that's kind of okay within that structure. A certain amount of corruption, a certain amount of abuse is tolerated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise it shakes things up too much. And then it opens up to the ability that you can predict. It might be the part of me that was like a psychologist back in the day in a research side.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to the extent that this is true, we didn't talk for a couple of weeks, but I did kind of try to investigate the Epstein thing more deeply. We won't talk about it now, but I mean, I think there's not just smoke. There's like fire and shit. Like there's corruption there for sure. If
Oh
you decide to
yes.
go down the rabbit hole and really look at it, and it like goes out everywhere. It's not one party or another party. There's corruption
Yeah.
for sure. And if you just on a human level, you would think, okay, I want to see that outed and cleaned up, you know, outside of any partisanship,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, just because there's victims who were abused and you want to break up things who might also be out potentially abusing other people,
Correct.
right? Like you want to bust that up.
Yeah.
Um, like and for psychospiritual reasons, right? You can't have abuse of women in Tantra. No, 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 that's not right. You have to stop that, you know, even from the psychospiritual point of view, the historical abuse of women has to be stopped.
Well, and we won't go into it, but they're only mentioning women. They're like
Also true
specifically,
too. Yeah,
they're
also true too. Yeah,
specifically only mentioning women.
yeah.
And for me, for just understanding the world that we live in, yeah,
No,
no,
that's true.
I'm sorry.
That's a good
I'm
call.
I'm sorry. Let's not let's let's understand evenly that like the desires of those who have an endless desire for debauchery and things that cannot be purchased. It is not limited to the standard desires for what, most people would consider tolerable or intolerable in this case. And I don't believe that it stops at girls personally. So,
No, and like if you go to other scandals, it's definitely young boys too,
oh,
right?
totally. Yeah.
Yeah. That you said an interesting thing there, and we won't go on the down the rabbit hole of that either, but the thing that you can buy everything you want except this thing is interesting because I was listening to someone talking about
Yeah.
this whole scandal who's been, like an investigative journalist around it, and that was one of their theories. You can buy everything, but you can't buy this one, and it gives it this
Correct.
weird, you know, uh, perverse psychotic allure or something, right? It's
That's the
bizarre
yeah,
psychologically. Yeah.
that's the disdain that most people have for various levels of authority, and then people who have purchased their way outside of society's druthers, the elites, the quote unquote elites, the people who have money, basically, like
Yeah.
enough money to do whatever you want. The problem is that you're really at the top of the food chain, and I don't, not spiritual pyramid, but of the normal food chain of society. You're wanting money, you're wanting power, and then you're wanting the things. But when you have both money and the power and you can have the things, that doesn't give you the same dopamine dump that it once did, you know?
I guess there's a certain truth to that
So
potentially,
you,
right?
so
Because that's what
you
they're talking about.
yeah, so you need more. And that's why social media and whatever, it's why I've always been, anti that shit is because it's an endless dump of dopamine. And so people who are kind of like on that regularly, they know that like the like that you get from the person you want to like your shit is not the same value as a like on a post from somebody else that you don't really care about because you want that particular thing. That's the nugget for you. But then when they start liking your stuff all the time, it doesn't feel as good as if you weren't sure that they were following you or doing whatever. Same thing when people are able to purchase whatever they want, that doesn't have the same dopamine hit. If I could buy any car that I want as much as I want, what does it matter if I buy a Ferrari or a Bugatti or a McLaren or whatever? That doesn't matter. I want something that's one of one, or one of five. Now I'm the only one. Now I'm special. And notice I'm saying me. I'm special. My ego needs to feel identified very clearly, special, unique, one of one. Okay. But then how does that extends then to other experiences? And so these experiences only become more and more rare. So people want to have experiences, and when you're outside of like the moral code that most people follow because you believe yourself to be, special, the rules don't apply anymore. They should, but they don't because you feel yourself to be better than, and that is and let's let that lead us into our discussion of the, you
A
know,
charismatic authority
yeah,
flows out of
charismatic
that,
authority
right?
because that
Does
is
flow out of that.
inherently part of that. I mean, and it's been that way. When you give the definition of it, people will see it's been this way for. I mean, since these types of figures have been in power, this has always come along with it.
Well, it's a fascinating thing. Okay, so this is Max Weber, right? This is our educational part of the podcast,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We're trying to like cover some of the great thoughts about these subject matters that we're wrestling with. Hopefully, we'll all benefit from it. So, context, Weber has this idea that there's these different types of authority and they sort of clash with one another. So
Hmm.
your legalistic, rational people will have a certain, or that type of authority will have a certain modus operandi, you might say, right? Certain ideals, certain vision of how things are supposed to be. Traditional authority people are different. We did episodes on those. Now we're in this charismatic one, right? And they have a certain intrinsic clash. So that's something to explore too, right? And I'm, again, like to me, I'm, again, maybe as a psychologist and a clinical person, I'm like, I think these are personality types too, either on the
Yeah.
top or the bottom, people who are drawn to this some way or another.
Yeah.
So charismatic authority. Okay, so the interesting thing about this in Weber is the use of that term, and we just have to point it out, does go back to Christianity, right? And so some of these things we would think as being very toxic leaders just inherently, right? You're full on cult leaders. But he's drawing back on something that's Christian, right? The charismatic movement, right? So again, it's an interesting thing because we can decide what of this we might think is good or what of this we might think is bad. But he is drawing from that, right?
Hmm.
So then we can trace through, we're going to emphasize more the toxic sides, right? Um, all right. So, we can see that this can fit in with something that we would all agree could be toxic and then the cult idea. All right. So the big idea here is that you have to see the person who's the leader as having some kind of superhuman qualities,
Hmm.
right? You have to invest this leader with something, superlative. And so in doing the research around this for this, you can have different versions of what this might mean, and we could think of something being good or bad. But certainly you can say there might be a shamanic version of this, right? Where the
Hmm.
shaman has super qualities, and we can invest that person as having a lot of charismatic authority within whatever the community that would be.
Hmm.
Or back to like biblical prophets, and we'd say, okay, this person has seems to have special, abilities and qualities. And again, we can value judge that whether we think that's good or bad. Um, Warrior type people, historically kind of get this kind of thing, right? If you're in like warrior type culture settings, one of the people I was researching would mention like Achilles or something like that for the Greek myths or something. He's a warrior. We invest him with these super qualities, right?
But
Yeah, go ahead.
you know what's interesting, Eric, is that like we fancy ourselves as a very rationale based society,
Mhm.
and yet we love cults and anoint people who have a mystical aura about them that is outside of rationality. It's almost like we cling to rationality as if it is the language of understanding, or the currency to understanding. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. And yet the things that have the most meaning are outside of rationality.
I
And
mean, it's interesting that way to
and
figure
it's
out what to
almost
do about that too is interesting. Yeah.
and it almost has to be that way. You almost have to be outside of rationality, or else you would be subject to the same laws of investigation that everybody else would be, and then you would have a bunch of holes poked in you because you can't claim some sort of like spiritual superiority. I'm dunking right now, Eric. I put some needles in
You
my
got
head
some
earlier.
flow, man. You got some flow.
Yeah, but like that's how I see it, right? We think of people in charge all over the world now, and there's an air of spirituality almost with them. Like you're saying, like they have this superhuman quality to them. And that doesn't hold up to the rigors that we believe in. Science. Oh, I guess that's why you might attack it. But anyways, I
Yeah.
digress.
It's interesting in that, like, I have like ambivalent feelings about this, even in the spiritual traditions I'm interested in. I met some
Yeah.
people who are extraordinary people,
Yeah.
and like who could do some pretty wacky, extraordinary stuff, like
Mm-hmm.
great Zen masters and Qigong people and
Mm-hmm.
great teachers within spiritual stuff. Yet at the same time, and I've come more and more to believe in this as we've gone through this podcast, I still think you need the rationalistic authority that has to be part of this, right? Like I'm wary of the idea of like I'm just going to imbue this spiritual figure, even on a personal level, with all of this stuff. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's entirely healthy. Even in the traditions that I like, I'm ambivalent about that. I'm not sure if it's good, you
Yeah.
know. And I'm not going to call out anyone in particular, but I think that's part of the draw for me of like the Dalai Lama tradition to an extent because it's very rationalistic on some level, right?
Yeah.
It isn't just here's this extraordinary person and we should all follow them just because they show some extraordinary qualities. I'm suspicious of that. I don't know if it's always good. So I mean, even in myself, I wrestle with that.
Yeah.
And then when I was thinking about these different kinds of authorities, I was like, yeah, there has to be something that's rationalistic. And we like that quote from the Buddha where he goes like, don't just believe it because I said it,
Yeah.
test it. Like as if I was selling you some gold,
Mhm.
and you wouldn't just take my word for it. You would test it and you would scrape it and do everything you need to do to confirm that I'm not giving you like some fool's gold.
Mhm.
So that's interesting. I've like asked a lot of questions around this. This has been an interesting series for me. You
Mm.
know, yeah, the same way it's like hitting for you in different ways. Yeah.
Mhm.
The other thing that was brought up with this, and maybe it fits into what you're talking about there too already, Daniel, is, one of the guys I was listening to about this would talk about military figures that might be more current, but we don't have as many of those now. We don't even have like famous military generals like, a General MacArthur from World War II or like a Patton or something. We don't have those figures. They're not
Not
so
no
notorious anymore.
no. I mean, I'm not so. I mean, I'm just again, I'm a generalist.
Uh-huh.
You had from the first Gulf War, you had Norman Schwarzkopf because he was the
Well,
first.
one of the guys I was listening to mentioned him as like
Because
fitting into that thing.
yeah, because he
Hmm.
was the first 5-star probably since I don't even know when, a long time. So 5-star general, which means you're in command of, you have the high, you're the
Hmm.
highest ranking general because there's many generals. Um, and that was kind of it. And then you had, but then why is because generals have generally moved into politics after their service is over. And
Hmm.
so the shine of their time in service and in theater, specifically, I mean like battle, um, tend to tends to get a little sullied because of their political affiliation or their supposed political affiliation, so thinking of General Flynn, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hmm. He's
And
not,
he,
yeah,
yeah, no, off the deep end. And but
super
then
partisan off the deep end
super
guy,
partisan,
so he's
whatever.
not going
But
to
then,
carry the same shine. Yeah.
you had another guy, uh, what's his name? Mad Dog,
Yeah,
uh,
Matt Doug Mattis. Yeah.
General Mattis, thought to
Mhm.
be a partisan person. Turns out not at all. Actually, I heard him speak at a commencement at West Point some years ago, and was very nonpartisan, actually, surprisingly so.
Yeah, a lot
So,
of the military people I talk to about him, they have really good impressions of him,
yeah,
like people
very,
who
very
served,
good.
indirectly under him, but they were like their opinion of him is very high.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we just don't get that. So those people don't move into the zeitgeist of general awareness because
Yeah.
they don't, unless they're moving into politics, you're not going to know them. So it's hard to anoint them, you
And
know.
maybe the United States just hasn't had those like massive military, victories that have been so clear cut, like for so long in our lifetimes, It just hasn't been where there's some person that gets all the aura,
Well,
to use the Gen Z term aura.
there's also one other
Yeah.
piece, Eric.
Hmm.
And spoiler alert, if you have not watched Oppenheimer, turn this off right now. Turn it off right now.
Hmm.
But I don't know why I need to do that, but whatever. And Oppenheimer, because we already know the story, but um it is, Oppenheimer feels bad that he was the one who was in charge of this project,
Yeah.
to make the atom bombs. And he goes to see, I think it was, who was it, Truman
Yeah,
at
yeah,
the
yeah.
time.
Hmm.
And the guy's like, he's like, I feel bad for what I did. And Truman told him, he's like, what did you do? It's my decision. I
Oh,
did this.
interesting.
You didn't do shit. Thank you for your service.
Really, that aggressive?
Yeah,
Like,
and then when he's
wow.
leaving, at the end of the movie, he's like, he goes, "Get this pussy out of here. I don't ever want to see him again."
Truman says that?
Yes, that's
No
supposedly that's what it.
shit,
Yeah.
really?
So
Okay.
so why don't we have that? Is because it reweaves us back into our point about charismatic authoritative figures. They want the glory because they are the one in the
Mm,
limelight. So they're going to
yeah.
absorb all of that. They're because as we've seen from many stories previous, the generals get the glory, and now all of a sudden the general is in the next is a parallel to the leader. But the leader inherently is always having to fend off people who want to be in his position. And
Well,
if
that's could be true too, right?
and
You,
if,
yeah, yeah.
and only really, you can't have multiple people who are outside of rationality in terms of their superlatives. So therefore, if there is somebody who is outside of rationality and almost superhuman, and now there's two superhumans, we already know, unfortunately, in this world, there are no Marvel characters, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah,
So we
yeah.
can't have a team of superhumans ruling over us. It doesn't work. Look at the series The Boys. They're just,
Yeah, I was just thinking of like Homelander, right? Like
yeah.
that the shine is off of that, right? We
Yeah, it
don't
doesn't
have
it
that
doesn't go
feeling
well.
anymore.
So inherently they're looking to have people be intentionally below them because they're the special ones. They're the most special, and therefore that's why they're in charge.
Well, I suppose like and we'll close it off, but I don't know if Iraq and Afghanistan, those wars just don't look good,
No.
So if you need like to get the shine of that, you probably would need like a war that everyone thought was just, like a Patton World War II thing or something. We all agree it's just, and that person can get that aura around them, right?
But
What?
honestly,
Yeah,
we weren't alive during that period, and the people who were are no longer alive now.
yeah,
So
yeah.
we don't even know the resistance that was here. We assumed that like everybody was gung ho, and
Hmm.
dum da dum dum dum. Like we look at shit now and we're like, oh no, this is obviously propaganda. But what do we have from that time? Propaganda.
Yeah,
That's
it's
what
going to be propaganda
survives.
one way or the other. But like Eisenhower got elected president, I watched movies, with my dad about this military general that,
Yeah.
the MacArthur movie or the Patton movie. Like, so anyways, it's interesting. We'll have to see how our culture goes forward with that. But
Yeah.
what one of the guys said was that as far as this thing goes, and he uses a weird word, he talks about berserker. I don't know if like Weber uses that, but athletics is like that maybe now a little bit too, where it's the athletes
Sure.
who are taking on those that kind of quality, right?
Yeah.
So like a Tom Brady or a Michael Jordan or a LeBron James, And that's interesting to talk about that. Maybe we'll take some of those athlete guys and come back to it because, part of
Mm.
what's going to happen when we get to it is the more miraculous the feat, the more the person gets the aura, right? So, um, all right. Anyways, in this list, shamans and prophets and warriors, maybe athletes in our culture is kind of doing that. And then people who you probably would call demagogues, right? So a provocative term. I think Napoleon came up as an example, if you look at a historical figure, but power hungry leaders,
Mm.
right? And then the idea with all of this, as we were just alluding to, is the idea that they have something miraculous. They do miracles in the eyes of their followers. So they get imbued with this, like, again, like transcendent quality, this supernatural quality. Um, I know one of the people I was talking to about this, one Ryan K. Davenport, our anthropologist and TCM friend, he said that after that bullet just grazed Trump's ear, he was like, "Oh my God, he's going to get elected, like no doubt, and he's going to take everything over."
Mm.
Just because of the aura of that charismatic
Correct. Yeah.
quality for the people who are his followers, it's going to seem miraculous, right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Have you
So the
seen this?
next,
Have you seen the scar, by the way, or no? Huh. Okay. Anyways, so you were saying
I'm glad you went there. Thanks.
you were saying, Eric?
Moving on, moving on. All right. So the interesting thing about this is there's like a kind of a duty boundness to this type of authority because if someone comes on and they seem to have this specialness about them, there's this specialness, charismatic power, and authority, well, then the people who are drawn into that, you feel a need to follow that, right? Because it seems so persuasive. How could I not follow this person? Look at what a
Mm-hmm.
badass they are,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then it creates this weird situation that no matter how otherwise unreasonable the authority might seem, it still will get this, again, kind of like, again, aura of justification around it, right? Just by virtue of the fact of who it's coming from, because we've imbued this person with all of this charismatic power. So I think that's kind of a fascinating thing too, because it really shows you for people who are maybe under the sway of that, or if we want to make it a psychological type and you're vulnerable to that,
Mm-hmm.
even if it seems like what you were talking about reasonableness, right? Even if it seems kind of crazy, you're like, well, it's coming from this person. And it would be bizarre not to obey this person because look at their super awesomeness.
Right. Yeah.
So it doesn't matter how crazy it sounds. I guess I still have to kind of go along with it. And that has a certain weird kind of inner rationale to it, I suppose.
Gotta
I think
do it.
that's an interesting observation, right?
Gotta do
So,
what Daddy says.
yeah, especially because why would I not obey him? Look at like he's like super awesomeness personified.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. This also then creates like how you structure the charismatic community, which everything sort of funnels around that charismatic figure, that charismatic leader. So it's kind of like there like you don't like in the legalistic authority thing we were talking about before, a lot of hierarchy, a lot of division of power, a lot of things where you kind of disperse the authority around, right? But this will all be magnetized around that one figure. And that means that anyone who's like around that figure in any position around them is going to have just that figure as the focal point, and it sort of all funnels through that one person.
Eric, is
Seems
there an
clear,
example of
but
a
not like distribution of power. Everything will hinge on like what's my relationship to this person. So you might say like Pam Bondi fighting to be close to Trump, and someone else will be fighting if we want to make him into this kind of person, right? I think there's something else describes him better, but everyone's going to be jockeying for how they are relative to that person.
is there ever is there an example of a woman in this type of position, in this charismatic, authoritative position that you're from? I can't think of. I'm trying to think. Well, I'm not trying to think. I am thinking, and I cannot think. I'm trying to think.
Well,
Um,
there's like some of those. There are female figures that can show up. I know, like thinking the things that immediately pop to mind are women who are figures from other cultures almost.
sure,
Like so
but
I've been
that are
I've been
of
around like
this.
female figures who are spiritual leaders who obviously have big followings. I don't know how to judge whether they're good or bad, corrupt or not corrupt. I think you can get that in some other cultures, but it might be hard in our culture because it is so patriarchal. It might be harder for women to take
Well,
on that
that's what
role.
I'm saying.
Hmm.
That's what I'm saying. There's almost like an aura of, we've called this before, like superficial masculinity. That is superficial. I'm going to make a list, superficial masculinity,
Hmm.
this sort of like um, superhuman quality uh, that creates an aura of justification,
Yep.
you know. And what's the other one?
Well, it gets into the idea of like how this relates around. You can build a community where everything funnels through devotion to the leader.
Yeah, and that leader is outside of rationality.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They're
The rationality isn't going to be imposed on them because it would be irrational not to follow them because of their super awesomeness.
yeah. Hello,
That's the rationality. Have you
that's
not
right.
seen how awesome this person
Yeah,
is?
I mean, my
Hello, that's the rationality.
wait, my God. Oh, wait, my God. Oh,
Yeah,
it strikes again, does it not? Or has it ever not stricken us?
it is an interesting question. But I mean, I wasn't thinking about in the context you were bringing up, but when you really make it that way, even the figures who get a lot of TLC in American culture, they're not imbued with this superhuman quality. I don't think so. I can't think of any political leaders who got this kind of shit going on.
No,
And I can't think of any, even like, like your Taylor Swifts or your Beyoncés. Does anyone imbue them with this kind of thing? I don't think so. And I think even their vulnerabilities make them more interesting. They don't have to put on this super shine
this is a cult
of something
phenomenon.
transcended. It's interesting.
This is any cult, any structure of cult. This is the structure of the cult.
Well, I mean, this is the one that, when we were talking about doing Weber, this was the one that was going to be the most culty.
Yeah, yeah. And so anything that feels culty, this is why it feels culty.
Now, I think you can get traditional authority in things after the cult figure dies. So we had on Leslie, right, to talk about what it was to be Jehovah Witness. That can be a
Yes.
cult, but that's based on traditional authority, probably. A
Yes.
long time ago, this dude said it, so now we're still following it. And I think and then we'll get to that idea that what happens as this progresses forward. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't know if you see the female figures.
You don't see the female figures. The other thing with once the cult figure dies, the replacement it emulates tries to emulate, and doesn't try to steer away. And then next subsequent generations will harken back but make further changes. And according to, because I did some social psychology, and one particular social psychologist, they call him the father of sociology, or I interchange those words. So apologies if that's confusing for people. Sociology, the father of sociology. I don't know if he's Turkish or Egyptian. Ibn Khaldun is his
Mhm,
name,
mhm, mhm. Yeah, yeah.
and he says four generations. The first
Oh, yeah.
person,
I've looked at a little bit at him too. Yeah, that might be
yeah,
the way that works.
yeah, the
Yeah.
first person is the first generation, and that's the strongest. That's where that comes from. The next generation, and he's talking about kingdoms in particular, but it can be related to other things. That is like the son. So they could say, "Oh, your father was a really great," or your mother was, but it's probably father. So your was a really great man. I knew him. You're his son. I saw. Okay, but then now the next one is like, "Oh, your grandfather." But
Yeah.
no one really knew him. They heard tales. And now it's your great grandfather. These are now legends. And after that, it's like, oh, your great great grandfather. No one knows at this point. These are
Yeah,
echoes
it gets
from the
too far
past.
away from the source. And so,
Correct.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we can even double back on that. Weber has some stuff about how he thinks this stuff can get passed along.
Sure.
So, yeah, yeah, yeah. But that's true. That's like already interesting, right? That's one of the pathways that you can get, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, through familiar lineage or through other things like,
Mm-hmm.
okay. And then maybe we'll get back to it because that's going to raise a big question of like what's going to happen. Like people are debating this now. What's going to happen within MAGA to the
Mm-hmm.
extent that MAGA is a cult? What's going to happen to them, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm okay calling it a cult, but all right. Um, okay, so the other thing that comes up is the relationship of money. to this, the financial aspects of this. And there's a kind of an interesting point that's made, which is that this person should not make their money through normal means because that's too mundane.
Mm,
That embeds you too much in like the structure that's here now, and you're supposed to be transcendent of that. So the interesting thing is if you go back to like, say, the Christian tradition, maybe you're there and you're asking for alms and you're supporting that way. Or like Buddhist stuff, right? As a
hmm
charismatic tradition. You could be begging, you could be getting gifts, but the other part is that you could steal it or you could conquer it.
mm,
And in a weird way, the point that's being made is that in any of those ways, if you're stealing or conquering even, we would say, well, that looks not that awesome. But the point is that you're not part of the normal rules of the world. To the extent that the charismatic leader is just doing mundane work, working, making their money, making their finances in a mundane way, that doesn't work because that seems to undermine the magical qualities of the person who's the charismatic leader. They're supposed to be outside of the rules of this world, and are also supposed to be sort of challenging them.
I
And
got
I
it, Eric.
couldn't help thinking like, like even if you go to like DGT, our President Donald Trump, does he make any money in any legitimate way? Really, no. Right?
You have
It's a
to
big
be.
story of like sneakiness and corruption. But if you're into charismatic authority, you're kind of like, look at this guy.
Well,
He's
look, I mean,
miraculous, right? It gives
Look at
the
Putin.
person miraculous powers.
There's numerous people that'll say Putin's the richest person in the world,
Hmm.
but on his
All through
Google,
no route of legitimacy.
but if you look at his Wikipedia, it doesn't say he's that rich, you know. But here, I have it.
Uh-huh.
They're necessarily extraordinary.
Yeah, I think that's right. And if the person made their money through some normal humdrum way, they wouldn't seem this awesome.
Oh,
Yeah, but if they're like, wow, look at this guy's able to amass all this fucking money through whatever the thing is. Of course, people like Jesus and Buddha aren't amassing tons of money. Those are
oh,
different figures.
boo.
What about the prosperity gospel? What
Yeah,
about the
that's right.
prosperity gospel? Yeah. So, anyways, the person should be able to get their money in through what seem like miraculous ways. And if you're going to conquer, you just, or you're even stealing, but you're like, wow, look at that badass person. They're outside the
Mm,
rules of things. It's an interesting observation.
mm,
And then when you look at the time now, you're like, yeah, we got a lot of motherfuckers who work within this thing and they
yeah.
do a lot of corrupt shit. But I mean, if you're into charismatic authority, if that's a psychological type, then you're kind of okay with that. It's
Does
one of
he
those things that
say?
answers the question of like, why do people tolerate that level of corruption? But that's a legalistic, rationalistic point, right? You're like, this motherfucker shouldn't be allowed to be so corrupt. But if you're charismatic and you follow that person, you're like, look at him. He's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyways, does he say what? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off on
Does
that.
he say who might be attracted to these types of authority, or he's just giving descriptions of authoritative uh, people, and then we are left to sort of decipher that based on our own experience.
I think what I find fascinating about it is that it seems to me to be a statement about like what a group might be like.
Mm.
But I think it's psychologically interesting, like as we were talking about earlier, to think, okay, what kind of people are drawn to this kind of stuff? Because this is a personality type then, who can be drawn to these kinds of things. And that I find really interesting. I don't know if he's fully saying that. I don't want to claim more expert on Weber than what I am, but like certainly one of my reactions to this and like kind of filtering through him is like, yeah, this sounds like, especially when you look at America, because it's diverse enough. And you can almost start to go like, oh, that's a legalistic, rationalistic person.
Mm.
Oh, that's a traditionalist person. That's a probably someone who's drawn to charismatic figures. It almost ends up looking like it's probably a personality type test. Or at least
Mm.
I find it interesting to think that way. Does that make
Mm.
sense to you diagnostically?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about it. I don't know if I have a clear answer in the moment, but it does seem like there's a tendency. We like to talk
Hmm.
about these words, tendencies and vulnerabilities, or personality type, archetype, whatever. Yeah, that
Hmm.
there is certain kinds of people that are going to be drawn towards certain things, and obviously this gets played out politically in voting blocks, people who identify as one, the other. Like they have this kind of like self-identifying distribution.
Hmm.
But I guess that question is like, why? That's really what I want.
It's
I want to
it's
know
fascinating
why.
because if it is a personality type, then all this stuff sort of starts to fit. That's what I found fascinating.
Because
Like, why would a traditional authority person not be bothered by sexual abuse? But they're not.
right.
But if that's a personality type, then you would really say, like I was talking about earlier, you would predict like, probably this Epstein thing would just eventually like, it's okay. Because it's just a personality type. There's something intriguing to me about that. Or why is people not bothered by corruption within their charismatic leader? Because this only adds to their aura.
And it's not like, anybody who's, pro MAGA is some kind of like right-wing evangelical. That's not the case. It's not true. I mean, yeah, that they might be a part of that coalition, but that's more than them. So we can't say, oh, the religious component is the thing. No, there's plenty of non-religious
No,
people.
I honestly, when looking at that part, I was laughing because obviously there's a part of Christian nationalists that are in MAGA, but you're
Of
making a different
course.
point almost.
Yeah,
You're
yeah, yeah,
basically
yeah.
saying, like, I don't think all of MAGA is Christian nationalists. I think there are traditional authority people who are in that,
Yeah.
and they're looking at him to like kind of like, provide elements of their traditional authority needs. And probably some of that is even a little bit strategic, okay, we're not totally into him, but okay, you
But then
know.
even but
But
then
then I think there's another part that is drawn to like a charismatic thing, and that's a different kind of vibe within what makes up MAGA. That's how I'm analyzing it.
yeah, but then we not everything doesn't revolve around, you know, political things because people have regular lives that are
Yeah,
not political. People, leaders of churches, CEOs of companies, the kind of characteristics that get imbued upon these people oftentimes are not rational. Sometimes they are, but often they're not. And
no, they're really not. Yeah, it's
right.
true.
And so I just wanted to kind of like, bring it down to like a little bit more of a ground level.
I don't know to what extent it's a personality type. If like you're into like hero worshiping, like we come from Chicago, so like Ditka, Mike Ditka, or whoever the sports figure is, are you a little bit more vulnerable to hero worshiping someone in the political sphere? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know the answer to it, but it's one of the things you would wonder about. And then it's a kind of like a personality trait. And then you're looking around for whoever that charismatic person. I can't lie, I've seen this in like the spiritual circles that we move in
Yeah.
too, and I'm
Yeah.
uncomfortable with it. Even with teachers that I love, there are people who will get they have a lot of that charismatic personality type to them. And I've been like uncomfortable a little bit.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to be the charismatic authority space because I think it undermines your ability to grow on some level,
Hmm.
right? If I'm going to imbue this person. But I've seen, I can't lie. I've seen, even with teachers I respect, I've seen students do this.
And,
Can't lie. It's true.
and I've had numerous people reach out to me over the years when they see that I offer some shamanism or something like this that is kind of outside the norm,
Yeah.
that they are specifically seeking a miracle.
Yeah.
That's what they want. And I find that to be interesting because it is again, it's a non-rationalistic kind of experience, number one, but then they want it rationalized. You know what I'm saying? So they want something,
Oh, I see. Okay.
so they want something that transcends language to be moved through language so that they can understand it in a way that they can break it down. There's like multiple layers of filtration, and it's sort of the opposite of what they're wanting actually. And for the few people who, and I'm not saying I could perform miracles. I'm not saying that not saying that at all, right? I'm just gonna say I've done some, as we all have. Everybody's done some wild things in their life, whatever.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I've done some very interesting things in terms of working with people and whatnot. The handful of times, or more than a handful, but the handful of times that I'm thinking about right now that I've done something that transcends rationality for somebody, it's it's been too much for them. Even though they sought that, it's been too much. And I've never seen them again. This happens numerous times. So I don't really do it too much anymore because I don't, it's not, well, not to be weird, but it's not good for business. But like, but from the compassionate perspective, I don't even know if it's good for their process overall because then the curiosity for whatever path that was providing them to search and to question and whatever is just finished in a moment. Obviously it took many moments to get to that moment, but after that, it sort of, loses its power. So I don't know. The whole thing is just very interesting. But a reason why I bring that up is because in order for someone to seek a miracle or seek something like that transcends rationality, they have to believe that somebody can transcend rationality themselves. And so they imbue upon them this kind of superhuman quality, at least for the time at which that person is performing said miracle. Because if they don't, withhold or suspend judgment or withhold disbelief, it's not possible. They'd have to be,
Yeah.
you know
You'd
what I'm
have to
saying?
buy into the fact that someone could be miraculous to imbue any individual person with that power and then like elevate them to that space, right?
Correct. Correct.
I The other part you're bringing up is like is I've been trying to work through this for myself and people who are listening will all have our own thoughts about this stuff. I've been
Yeah.
like, well, I don't even know where if I want to say these are different like sort of ways of looking at the world, right?
Mm.
I don't know if I completely understand always where these things come from. I've listened to people talk like, let's say someone's going to be in MAGA, why are they doing that? And I'm like, I don't know if that's clear to me. And that probably isn't one answer for, for the different groups of people we're talking about. But for this, I can get like, okay, yeah, there's different personality types and what are they like? And this, again, does help to explain things,
Mm-hmm.
to me. Like, why is for the people who believe in the charismatic authority, let's say of someone like a Trump, why is his corruption okay? Well, of course it's okay because that just adds to like his aura of miraculousness, right? That he's able to accumulate all this stuff, transcending the normal means of how mundane people have to get their way through the world. It adds to the hype.
Mm.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we'll wrap it up for today. I know we got a couple of minutes left. If you're okay recording, you cool for a few more minutes?
Yeah, yeah, 2, 3.
All right. Well, it might take us a little bit longer with this, but let's see what we can end up with this. Um,
Let's call it.
You want to break it?
Yeah, we'll
Okay.
break it. Yeah,
Maybe
we'll break
we'll
it.
do, since charismatic authority is one of our main ones, maybe we'll just do a mini episode next time and we'll finish this stuff up because there's a few more things to say about
Okay.
it.
All right.
All
Well,
right.
cool.
That sounds like a plan.
Yep.
Interesting. Thanks,
Yep.
Daniel.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, no, no.
thought-provoking.
Yeah, thanks for doing it. Yeah, I mean it's good. We've been working towards this for quite some time and I imagine we're getting close to a pausing point for this period of
Hmm.
investigation.
Yeah.
So everybody, so if you're tuning in at this point in the episode, your attention span is in the top 5% of humanity, immemorial.
Mm.
Um, and I read a couple pages of a book earlier, so my vocabulary is on fleek this evening. But thanks for tuning in. And we're just we've been doing this kind of like social psychology, sociology, diagnosing society as if it were to be a patient, and we're sort of working through that process together out loud over a long duration, over these last few months. So if you found this stuff interesting, thanks for tuning in. If you're listening today and you don't find it interesting, then don't tune in again. But we do, we've been doing sort of a spirituality podcast, and we still are over, the past 5+ years now, and we've covered many, many topics. But I think at the current moment, there's just a lot of stress in the world. There's just a lot of stress, and there is not a very clear end as to when that's going to be. Newsflash, there never is a clear end as to when that's going to be. Same thing kind of during COVID, but at least during COVID, we had an idea of what the cause was, and we just weren't sure when it's going to end. Now it's less clear, and there's just lots of people who are affected, by various forces, some environmental, you know what I'm saying? So it's not just one particular thing, but as compassionate people, as philosophers and medical practitioners, we try and observe the world around us so that we can orient ourselves and orient where it is that we could put our efforts in order to help people in the way that we find useful, and that really is through understanding. That's my medicine. I know, Eric, I believe that is one of your medicines as
Mhm.
well. And so if we can filter what we're seeing through our lens and try and break it down into bite-sized pieces and then share it with people, that helps us to understand personally. I know it does for me. Um, and then when we get feedback from people at ginandtantra@gmail.com or in the comment section of this video, or you could hit us up on the gram, the Gin and Tantra podcast, it helps us to further understand what people are taking from what we're giving. So please feel free to hit us up, share our work, like, comment, subscribe, do your thing. We appreciate everybody tuning in, whether it's your first or your thousandth episode or, whatever. We love having you guys here with us. Eric, It's always a pleasure, my friend. I learn so much every time, and I hope to continue
Yeah.
to do so moving forward. For Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Deuces.